I was used to the emotional bruises, but that night was the first time real blood hit the hallway tile. Lynette's hand cracked across my face just as the door swung open, neighbors peering. As I stumbled back, a gray-haired figure in a rain-soaked coat stepped forward. He just said, "Enough." Then from his pocket, he pulled a flat leather-bound object, an old iron key, and the entire Schultz family tree instantly went up in flames. My name is Laura Schultz. I am 31 years old, and I am, according to my business cards, a lead strategist at Stoneflower Strategies. I spend my days analyzing market vulnerabilities and advising multi-million-dollar clients on how to pivot, how to protect their assets, how to anticipate a threat and neutralize it before it can strike. On this particular late autumn evening in Columbus, I was failing to do any of those things for myself. The rejection, when it came, was not a dramatic confrontation. It was a sterile digital execution, delivered by my stepsister, Caroline. My phone, resting on the kitchen counter, had been buzzing with a surgical precision. I finally picked it up. "We're all meeting at the Guildhall at 7 for Dad's birthday." A pause, then, "We feel it's better if you just sit this one out. Laura, it's less stress for Dad. You know how you get." And the final, "Clean cut. He agrees. Please don't make this a scene." I stared at the screen, the blue light cold on my face. Please don't make this a scene. The implication, as always, was that the scene was my fault. My existence was the provocation. My desire to be included was the drama. I, Laura Schultz, lead strategist, was a market vulnerability to be neutralized. I tossed the phone onto the sofa and stared out the window. The Ohio sky was a bruised, weeping purple, the rain lashing against the glass of my sterile high-rise apartment. It was a cold night, the kind that got into the walls. I wasn't going to fight it. I wasn't going to drive to the Guildhall and press my face against the glass. I was just going to sit here, in the quiet, and let the familiar dull ache of it settle in my bones. The ache of being the leftover part, the inconvenient footnote from my father's first, failed marriage. The knock on my door came just after 8. It was too sharp, too impatient, not a delivery, not a friend. I looked through the peephole, and my stomach hollowed out. Lynette, my stepmother. She stood there, perfectly framed, her blonde hair immaculate despite the storm, her trench coat beaded with water. I could almost smell her perfume through the door, something expensive and suffocating, like lilies on a casket. I opened the door. There is no strategy for dealing with Lynette. She is the weather system you simply endure. "Laura, darling." Her voice was a confection of spun sugar, a voice she saved for public consumption and private condemnations. "I was so worried when you didn't answer Caroline." She didn't wait for an invitation, just brushed past me into the entryway, bringing the cold and the smell of lilies with her. She ran a perfectly manicured finger along my console table. "This place is so clean." It wasn't a compliment. "Laura, we need to have a little chat about your attitude. Your father is just heartsick about all this tension." I stayed by the door, my hand still on the knob. "He's sick about it? Or you are?" The sweetness evaporated. It always did, the moment it met resistance. Lynette's smile tightened. Her eyes, the color of a frozen lake, hardened. "You've been poisoning him against me for years," she hissed, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Ever since I arrived, you've been the little gray storm cloud, moping in the corner, trying to ruin every holiday, every celebration. You just couldn't stand to see him happy, could you?" "I wanted him to come to his daughter's," I started, but she cut me off. "He is with his daughter. He's with Caroline. He's with his wife." She took a step closer, crowding my space. "You are the problem, Laura. You are the one who takes up all the air in the room. You are selfish. And tonight, you tried to ruin his birthday. Again." "I didn't do anything," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I'm right here. I was uninvited." "And that's what you deserve." Her face was suddenly contorted, the mask of the elegant Columbus socialite slipping to reveal something raw and ugly beneath. You think you're so smart. With your little job and your little apartment, you are nothing. You are just like your mother, weak and in the way. And then she slapped me. It wasn't a dramatic, wind-up movie slap. It was a short, vicious, cracking blow. The sound was obscenely loud in the quiet hallway. My head snapped to the side, my hair flying into my face. A sharp, bright, stinging pain exploded on my cheek, and I tasted the metallic tang of copper. Blood. She had split my lip. I stumbled back, my hand flying to my mouth, my eyes wide with shock. In all the years of emotional torment, the gaslighting, the quiet exclusions, the whispered campaigns that painted me as unstable, it had never, not once, been physical. I was so stunned, I didn't immediately register the sound from down the hall, the metallic slide of a door chain. Mr. Henderson, in apartment 3B. His door was cracked open, a sliver of his face visible, his one eye wide, peering out. He saw me. He saw the blood dripping onto my hand. He saw Lynette, her chest heaving, her hand still raised slightly, her face flushed with a terrible, triumphant rage. He looked at me for one long, agonizing second, and then, slowly, the door clicked shut. The chain rattled back into place. A new kind of cold, sharper than the rain, flooded my system. The betrayal of his silence, of his retreat, was almost as stunning as the slap itself. I was alone. They would all say I was hysterical. They would all say I was lying. Lynette was right. I was nothing. Now, Lynette breathed, adjusting her cuff, her composure snapping back into place like armor. Are you finally ready to listen? Tap. A sound. Tap. It was quiet, but clear. It wasn't coming from an apartment. It was coming from the stairwell at the end of the hall. Tap. A slow, steady, rhythmic sound. Metal on the cheap linoleum tile. Lynette froze, her head tilting. I looked past her shoulder, down the long, fluorescent-lit corridor. A figure emerged from the shadows of the stairwell door. He hadn't used the elevator. He was tall. So tall he seemed to stoop slightly, and impossibly thin. He wore a heavy dark wool overcoat, soaked through with rain, and a simple gray cashmere scarf was wrapped loosely around his neck. His hair was thick and silver, brushed straight back from a high forehead. His face was a roadmap of angles and sharp lines, a face I had only ever seen in faded, sepia-toned photographs, pictures tucked in the bottom of a memory box my mother had kept, pictures my father had ordered me to throw away after she died, and Lynette moved in. J. Whitaker Schultz, my grandfather, my father's father, the man who had been exiled from the family, the ghost my father refused to even name. He didn't look at Lynette, not at first. He walked slowly, the silver head of his cane tapping the floor with each step, until he was standing just a few feet away. His eyes, a startlingly clear and intelligent gray, moved over me. He took in my split lip, the blood on my hand, the tracks of a single, shocked tear on my unhit cheek. It wasn't a look of pity. It wasn't the soft, coddling look of a doting grandparent. It was an appraisal. It was the look I gave a failing portfolio at Stoneflower. It was a look that calculated assets and liabilities, that assessed damage, and that formulated a response. He looked at me for a long time. Then, he lifted his gaze and settled it on Lynette. The entire atmosphere in the hallway changed. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Enough. His voice was not loud. It was dry, like old paper, but it had a resonant power that cut through the sterile air. It was not a request. It was a verdict. Lynette, who stared down city council members and bank presidents, who had never shown a moment of weakness in her life, flinched. She physically recoiled, her back hitting my apartment door. Her face, which had been flushed with victory, went a stark, chalky white. It wasn't just shock. It was recognition. It was a deep, primal, and visceral fear. She knew exactly who this was. You, she whispered. her voice trembling. "You're supposed to be—" "I am supposed to be precisely where I am," my grandfather said, his voice flat. He continued to stare at her, his gray eyes unblinking. "When my asset is threatened." He ignored her sputtering, her sudden desperate attempt to regain control. "This is a private family matter." Slowly, with the deliberate economy of movement of a man who never wasted an ounce of energy, J. Whitaker Schultz reached inside his heavy wool coat. My heart hammered. Lynette shrank back further. He did not pull out a phone. He did not pull out a wallet. He pulled out 3 things, one by one, and held them in his weathered palm. First, a small, flat notebook, bound in dark, cracked leather. It was ancient, the corners worn down to a soft suede, the leather embossed with a crest I didn't recognize. Second, a key. It was not a modern key. It was heavy, black iron, almost medieval in design, with an intricate, complex bit, a key for a vault or a gate, not a door. Third, a slim, silver USB drive. It looked jarringly modern next to the other 2 items. It caught the sickly yellow hallway light, and I could see tiny block letters etched into the metal, a date. 1978. Lynette's eyes fixed on the 3 objects. The color drained from her face entirely, leaving her looking haggard and old. A small, strangled sound escaped her throat. She knew what they were. My grandfather held them out on his palm for 1 more second, letting the reality of them sink in, letting the silence stretch. Then, he closed his hand into a fist and looked past Lynette, back to me. "Laura," his voice was the same, quiet, precise. "Would you care to join me this evening?" It was not a question. It was an extraction. I looked at this man, this ghost from a forbidden past. I looked at the blood on my fingers. I looked at Lynette, who was now visibly shaking, her mask of porcelain perfection completely and totally shattered. I didn't know who he was, not really, but I knew he was the antidote to the poison that had been choking me my entire life. I nodded, just once, a single, sharp dip of my chin. I didn't get my coat. I didn't get my shoes or my purse. I just stepped out of my apartment, my bare feet cold on the hallway tile, and walked past Lynette. I didn't even look at her. My grandfather pressed the down button for the elevator. The doors slid open instantly, as if summoned. We stepped inside. The doors began to close. In the silver-gray gap, I saw her, Lynette, still frozen in the hallway, her hand half raised, her mouth open in a silent scream. The last thing I saw before the doors sealed was the look of pure, unadulterated panic in her eyes. The elevator hummed, a soft, descending tone. I was shaking, the adrenaline and the shock making my teeth chatter. My lip throbbed. My grandfather stood beside me, smelling of cold rain, old wool, and something else. Dust, like a library. He didn't look at me. He opened his hand and stared down at the 3 objects resting in his palm: the leather book, the iron key, the silver drive. "She thought these were buried," he murmured, his voice almost too quiet to hear over the elevator's mechanics. "She thought my memory was buried right along with them. She underestimated the fine print." The elevator doors opened to the lobby, the sound of the storm outside a low, mournful howl. He finally turned to face me, his gray eyes, clear and sharp as glass, locked onto mine. I have waited a very long time for this moment. He didn't take me to a grand estate. There was no sweeping driveway, no waiting staff. His car was an old, impeccably maintained sedan that smelled faintly of leather oil and cedar. He drove with a quiet, unsettling economy of motion, his hands resting at 10 and 2 on the wheel. We drove for 15 minutes in complete silence, the rhythmic thwack-thwack of the windshield wipers cutting through the night. My lip had stopped bleeding, but it was swelling, a dull, heavy throb that matched the new, sharp pulse in my temples. We pulled into the parking lot of a diner, one of those all-night places with a buzzing neon sign that promised steak and eggs to a clientele of truckers and the sleepless. It was called The Anchor. We slid into a cracked red vinyl booth in the back corner. far from the two other patrons staring into their coffee cups. The waitress, a woman with tired eyes and a name tag that read, Brenda, came over. My grandfather ordered black coffee for himself and a hot tea with honey for me, his eyes flicking to my mouth for just a second, and a glass of ice water. When she left, he arranged the 3 items from his coat on the formica table, lining them up with the precision of a surgeon laying out his tools: the leather book, the iron key, the silver USB drive. "You have questions," he stated. It wasn't a question. "You've been gone for 30 years, I said, my voice hoarse. "My father said you disowned him, that you were gone." "Your father simplifies history to suit his own comfort," he said, taking a sip of the coffee Brenda had placed before him. He didn't seem to notice the heat. "What he calls disowning was a fundamental disagreement on asset management. What he calls gone was an exit from a boardroom I could no longer control." He leaned forward, the harsh diner lights carving new shadows into his face. "Your father, Laura, is a good man, but he is a weak one. He fears conflict more than he values truth. He married your mother in a fit of youthful rebellion he couldn't sustain. She was a kind woman, but not a strong one." He paused. "Strength and kindness rarely inhabit the same vessel. When your mother passed, your father was left with a vacuum, and nature, as you know, abhors a vacuum." "Lynette," I whispered, the name tasting like ash. "Lynette," he affirmed, his voice flat. "A woman who is not just sharp, but dangerously so. A woman who does not just see a vacuum, but has been trained to exploit it. She saw your father's grief and his weakness, and she executed a leveraged buyout of his entire life. She didn't just move into your mother's house. She annexed his will, his finances, and his children." The tea was hot, and the honey soothed the raw scrape in my throat. "She's been like this for years. Not the hitting, but the rest. The exclusions, the whispers, making me the villain, telling my father I'm unstable, that I'm difficult, making Caroline the perfect daughter and me the problem." I took a shaky breath. "Tonight, they cut me out of his birthday. Caroline sent the texts. Then Lynette showed up, to put me in my place, to talk sense into me." I touched my swollen lip, and Mr. Henderson, my neighbor, he saw it. He looked right at me, and he closed his door. My grandfather's face remained impassive, but his eyes, those clear gray eyes, hardened. "Good. A witness to your isolation. That is useful." I stared at him. "Useful? That's all you have to say?" "Rage is a fire, Laura. It burns hot and fast, and then it is gone, leaving you with nothing but soot. We will not be using rage." He tapped the table with a long, bony forefinger. "We will win this with evidence, not with volume. We will not argue with them. We will dismantle them, piece by piece, until the foundation collapses." He pushed the heavy iron key toward me. It slid across the table, cold and heavy. "What is this?" "That is the key to a safe deposit box at the Fifth Third Bank on Broad Street. It is registered to a holding company, Wren and Harbor Holdings. It is a shell, set up by your grandmother and me, decades ago. We go tomorrow morning at 9, when the bank opens." My heart hammered. "What's in it?" "The originals." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. He pulled the leather-bound book toward him and opened it. It wasn't a diary. The pages were filled with neat, precise columns of handwritten script, numbers, and dates. It was a private ledger. He flipped through several pages, the old paper crackling, until he found what he was looking for. He turned the book to face me. "Do you recognize this?" he asked, pointing to a line item. "Schultz Timber Assets, Caldwell County, TX. A transfer of deed. A sum of money that made my head spin." I saw my father's signature at the bottom. "It's from 2 years ago," I said, confused. "It is," my grandfather said. "Now, look at the date." My blood went cold. I knew that date. I remembered it vividly. I was at the hospital. That's the week he had his appendix out. He was in the hospital for 3 days. He had a complication. He was, by all medical definitions, under the influence of narcotics for 72 hours, my grandfather said. Now, look at the signature again. Is it his? I looked closer. It was good. It was very good. But the R in his middle name was too looped. The final S in his last name was too sharp. My father's signature, like his personality, was soft. The letters rounded. This was an imitation, a forgery, a hurried, arrogant forgery. She's been liquidating assets, I breathed, the scale of it hitting me. The old Texas mill, that was my grandmother's. It is your grandmother's, or rather, it is the trust's. He closed the book. Which brings us to this. He picked up the silver USB drive. The numbers 1978 seemed to glow in the dim light. Your grandmother and I, we saw this possibility. We saw the weakness in your father. We worried who might one day leverage it. So we created a failsafe, a trust, separate from the main family holdings. The Schultz Orchard Trust. It was designed to protect the core assets, the real assets, the land, from a hostile takeover, from an internal threat. He held the drive between his thumb and forefinger. This drive contains the audio file of my meeting with the lawyers. From 1978, it outlines the trust's primary and most unusual provision, which is a morality clause, a domestic conduct clause, to be precise. His eyes locked on mine, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something cold and triumphant. Lynette has spent 20 years isolating you, painting you as a liar, a troublemaker, an unstable force. She did this so that when she finally made her move on the assets, no one would believe you. Your word would be worthless. He leaned in, his voice dropping. But tonight, she made one single, catastrophic error in judgment. She broke the one rule she didn't know existed. She put her hands on you. She drew blood, and she did it, by your own account, in front of a witness. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. She escalated from emotional manipulation to physical violence, and in doing so, she just pulled the tripwire. I felt breathless. The trust? It's activated by the slap? It is activated by proof of the slap, he corrected. Proof that we will begin gathering tomorrow at 9. For now, you will remain silent. You will not answer her calls. You will not respond to your father or your stepsister. From this moment, all communication is strategic. The word strategic snapped my own brain back into focus. My job, my skills. He was right. This wasn't a family fight anymore. It was a corporate takedown. He signaled for the check, while he meticulously counted out cash on the table. I pulled my phone from my pocket. My hands were shaking, but not from fear anymore, from focus. I opened my email. I did not text. I did not call. I composed a new message to Rowan Pierce, the attorney I kept on retainer for Stoneflower Strategies. He was a shark, and he was my shark. Subject: Timeline verification. L. Schultz, OST 28. Body: Rowan. For the record, I am documenting an unprovoked physical assault by my stepmother, Lynette Schultz, at my apartment, approximately 8:15 p.m. this evening. The assault resulted in a split lip and facial bruising. A witness, Mr. J. Whitaker Schultz, was present. I am currently safe and with him. Please archive this email as a time-stamped, unalterable record of this event. I will be in touch tomorrow with further instructions. Laura. I hit send, a small digital timestamp, a piece of evidence, the first anchor in the storm. My grandfather's apartment was not a home. It was a command center. It was a Spartan attic loft above a quiet, closed-down antiquarian bookstore. The entire place smelled of old paper, floor wax, and coffee. There were no photographs, no comfortable sofas, just shelves, wall to wall, floor to ceiling, filled with books on law, finance, agriculture, and history. A simple bed was in one corner, a desk in another. He showed me to a small monastic guest room with a single cot. Rest, he said. Tomorrow, we go to the bank. He closed the door, and I was left alone in the heavy, scholarly silence. But I couldn't sleep. The adrenaline was still pumping, my mind racing, replaying the last 2 hours. The slap, the closed door, the iron key. After an hour, I crept out. The main room was dark, save for the green power light on an old, functional laptop on his desk. Next to it, he had left the silver USB drive. I couldn't help myself. I had to hear it. I sat at his desk, plugged in the drive, and put on the headphones that were coiled beside it. A single audio file appeared. I double-clicked. A hiss of old-fashioned tape. Then, a voice, my grandfather's, but younger, sharper, less dry. This is an extreme provision. JWW. You are effectively creating a financial tripwire based on a moral clause. A court could fight it. Then another voice, a man with a slight Boston accent. The lawyer. He's right, Whitaker. It's unconventional. And then, my grandfather's voice again, clear and cold as a winter morning. Unconventional is fine. Morality is the asset. Gentlemen, it is the only asset that matters. I will not have this family's work, my wife's work, used to fund a bully or a brute. I've seen it happen in other families. The line must be drawn. Codify it. There was a rustle of paper. If, my grandfather's voice continued, slow and deliberate, proven physical violence is enacted by a controlling party, a spouse, a guardian, anyone in a position of power, against a designated heir for the purpose of coercion or control. The primary asset line diverges. The orchard trust separates. Immediately and irrevocably, the power of the abuser is nullified. Put it in writing. The recording clicked off. I sat back, the silence of the attic rushing in. I took off the headphones. I looked at my reflection in the dark screen, my swollen lip, my wide, shocked eyes. If violence appears, the assets diverge. Lynette, in her moment of total, arrogant control, had just handed me the weapon. She had pulled the switch on a dead woman's claws, set in motion almost half a century ago. The trap had been sprung. Sleep was a shallow, fractured thing. I drifted in and out of consciousness on the narrow cot, the words from the audio file echoing in my head. The orchard trust separates, immediately and irrevocably. When a thin gray light finally filtered through the attic window, I was already dressed. My lip was a puffy, discolored mess, a constant, dull throb that served as a physical reminder of the night's pivot. My grandfather was waiting at the desk, sipping the same black coffee from the night before, as if he had never moved. He'd replaced his damp wool coat with a perfectly pressed dark gray suit. He looked less like a ghost and more like a CEO arriving for a hostile takeover. "Rowan Pierce's office is at 11, he said, not looking up from a ledger. First, the bank, then a doctor, then the building manager for the security footage, in that order. You don't want the footage first? I asked, my strategist's brain kicking in. It's the most direct proof. No, he said, closing the ledger. We secure our assets before we declare the war. The footage proves the assault. The contents of that box are the assets. We ensure our position is unassailable. Then we show our hand. He stood, picking up the heavy iron key. Order, Laura. It is our greatest weapon. The Fifth Third Bank on Broad Street was a monument of marble and quiet, expensive efficiency. The air was still and smelled of floor polish and old money. My grandfather, it turned out, was not just J. Whitaker Schultz. He was Mr. Wren, of Wren and Harbor Holdings, the bank manager, a woman with a smile as starched as her blouse, recognized him instantly and treated him with a deference that bordered on fear. We were led into the vault. The air temperature dropped. The silence absolute, save for the whisper of the ventilation. The manager used her key. Then my grandfather used the great iron one. He slid out a long black metal box. It was heavy. She showed us to a private viewing room, a small wood-paneled cubicle with a single table, and closed the door, leaving us in sterile privacy. My grandfather placed the box on the table. There was no lock. It was sealed. He ran a thin thumb along the edge and opened the lid. The smell of old, high-quality paper and wax hit me first. This was not a random collection of items. It was an archive, a time capsule, a weapon box. He was methodical. He did not rummage. He lifted each item out, one by one, placing it on the table. First was a heavy vellum document, bound in a dark blue legal cover. "The Schultz Orchard Trust," he said, his voice quiet. He opened it. The type was from an old typewriter. The ink faded but clear. I saw the date, 1978. He flipped a few pages. And here, he pointed to an addendum, a new signature page with a raised notary seal. The renewal, 2002. My breath caught. That was the year after my mother died. The year before Lynette officially married my father. He had known, even then. He had anticipated her. "The clause," I said. He turned another page, his long finger tracing down the dense text until he found it. Article 4, Section B. The language was cold, precise, and utterly brutal. It named coercive domestic action, undue influence, and physical battery against a designated heir as immediate triggers for a full, non-revocable transfer of asset control. It was all there, exactly as the audio file had promised. "Next," he said, and lifted out a thin manila folder. It was labeled, simply, L.S. Investments. Inside were not originals, but pristine, notarized copies of bank statements, wire transfers. My eyes scanned the details. They were from my father's private accounts I recognized from my old college tuition payments. But the destination was an LLC I had never heard of. Blue Asteria Holdings. "Lynette's," I stated. "A shell corporation she established 3 years ago," he confirmed. "She's been bleeding him, diverting funds into an investment vehicle under her sole control. This is the motive. The trust is the prize. But this is the petty cash she's been skimming." He pulled out the third item. It was a thick, leather-bound deed, the cover embossed with the state seal of Texas. "Caldwell County," he said, pushing it toward me. "The original timber mill land was sold off in the 90s, but your grandmother, she loved the trees. She used the proceeds to buy the land around it, an almond orchard." I opened it. The language was dense, but one phrase jumped out, underlined in my grandmother's elegant, faded blue ink. "To be held in trust for the benefit of the first legal female heir of the primary Schultz line." I looked at him, confused. "My father is not a female heir," he said. "Your grandmother was a very, very smart woman. She saw the weakness in her son, and she built a fortress around her legacy. This deed, this land, this multi-million-dollar operation. It was never your father's to give. It was never Lynette's to take. It has always been yours." The room suddenly felt very small. The air was too thin. Laura Schultz, the problem, the gray cloud, was the designated heir to a Texas stronghold. "And finally," my grandfather said, his voice was grim, "the proof of method." He pulled out a single, 4x6 photograph. It was a clear, glossy picture of a document. It was a standard medical power of attorney form, granting Lynette Schultz complete control over my father's medical decisions. It was dated exactly 2 years ago, the day of his appendectomy, and there, at the bottom, was the signature, not the soft, rounded script of my father, but the sharp, hurried, arrogant forgery from the ledger. His hand had been guided, or he had been so snowed by painkillers that he would have signed anything. "She didn't just grab for his money," I whispered, the cold reality settling in. "She grabbed for his life." The moment she had this, she controlled everything, my grandfather said. His health, his treatments, his competency. It gave her the legal cover to sign for him, to manage his affairs while he was unwell. This is the linchpin of her entire strategy. He stacked the documents into a neat pile: the trust, the wire transfers, the deed, the photograph. He placed them in his own modern briefcase. He left the heavy iron key in the empty black box. "We are finished here," he said. Rowan Pierce's office was the antithesis of the bank vault. It was all glass, brushed steel, and white light, overlooking the Scioto Mile. Rowan was my age, sharp, and perpetually underestimated. He specialized in asset protection and elder abuse, a combination that made him, as he put it, a very expensive referee for rich, dysfunctional families. He had already received my time-stamped email from the night before. I had called him on the way over, requesting an emergency consultation and invoking my stoneflower retainer. We sat at his glass conference table. My grandfather, silent and imposing, sat at one end. I sat at the other. Rowan stood, listening. I laid it out, not emotionally. I laid it out like a strategist. The incident, 8:15 p.m. Last night. Physical assault by my stepmother, Lynette Schultz. The trigger, exclusion from a family event. The witness, J. Whitaker Schultz, my paternal grandfather. I relayed the history, the isolation, the gaslighting. Then, my grandfather slid the briefcase onto the table and, one by one, laid out the contents of the black box. Rowan, who I had seen handle billion-dollar mergers without blinking, actually raised an eyebrow. He picked up the trust document first. He read Article 4, Section B, 3 times. "My God," he said, almost to himself. "This is an ironclad morality clause, and it's been renewed. This is beautiful. This is a work of art." He looked at the deed. "The Texas property. She probably doesn't even know it's not in your father's name." He looked at the wire transfers. "Motive." He looked at the photograph of the POA. "Method," and clear-cut undue influence, possibly criminal forgery. He finally sat down and steepled his fingers, looking at me. "Okay, Laura, here is the field. That slap wasn't just an assault. It was a breach of contract, a breach of fiduciary duty under the terms of this trust. It's the key that unlocks everything." He went to his whiteboard. "First, we file for an emergency temporary restraining order, TRO, against Lynette, based on the assault. This gets her away from you. Second, concurrent with the TRO, we file an injunction to freeze all assets related to the Schultz Orchard Trust and any accounts she controls jointly with your father, pending a competency hearing. We use the POA photo and the wire transfers as evidence of elder financial abuse." He underlined freeze twice. "She won't be able to move a dollar." "What do you need from us?" I asked. "Proof of the slap," he said. "A TRO based on he said, she said is weak. We need more." He pointed at me. 1. A medical examination. Today, I have a doctor I use. She will document the injury to your face. That validates your claim of physical harm." He pointed at my grandfather. 2. A sworn affidavit. You are a credible, high-value witness. You sign a statement, under penalty of perjury, detailing exactly what you saw and heard. He looked at me again. 3. The camera. Your building. Lynette is arrogant. She assaulted you in a public hallway. I'd bet $1,000 she never even thought to look for a camera. Get that footage, Laura. That's the kill shot." My grandfather nodded, pulling a pen from his coat. "I will sign the affidavit now." Rowan buzzed his paralegal. "Get me the standard witness forms, and book an appointment with Dr. Aris, immediately." While my grandfather wrote out his statement in his precise, steady script, my phone, which I'd retrieved from my apartment that morning, began to vibrate on the table. It was Caroline. I ignored it. It buzzed again. "Caroline." Again. A text. "Dad is worried sick. You need to answer." Again. My father. I looked at Rowan. He held up a hand. "Do not answer. Not now. Not ever. From this moment, you are in litigation. All communication goes through me. Anything you say to them can and will be used to undermine you, to paint you as hysterical, to muddy the water. You are a strategist. Laura, This is a hostile negotiation. You do not talk to the other side. The phone buzzed one more time. A text from my father. Laura, please. Lynette is very upset. We can sort this out at home. Please don't make this a big deal. A cold, hard clarity settled over me. The same old script. Don't make a big deal. My entire life had been defined by that phrase, by me, swallowing my pain, my isolation, my truth, to avoid making things a big deal for him. I did not reply. I took a screenshot of the text. I forwarded it to Rowan with a single line. Evidence of psychological pressure and attempted coercion. 10:48 a.m. Rowan smiled, a thin, sharp, predator's smile. Good. That's exactly right. He took my grandfather's signed affidavit, the medical report from Dr. Aris, that was messaged over an hour later. Contusion and laceration, consistent with blunt force trauma, and the thumb drive I acquired from my building manager containing a crystal-clear video of Lynette's arm swinging and my head snapping back. It's all here, Rowan said. Late that afternoon, he held the small drive aloft. The act, the motive, the method, and the legal mechanism. We file tomorrow morning. The court will serve her at her home. I estimate she will be frozen out of every account within 48 hours. We left his office as the sun was setting, painting the river in hues of orange and purple. We were quiet. The first strategic moves had been made. The machine was in motion. As we got into his car, my grandfather placed his hand on my shoulder. It was the first time he had touched me. His hand was thin and dry, but surprisingly strong. You did well today, he said. You were precise. You were orderly. He looked out the window at the dying light. Lynette will be served tomorrow. She will be enraged. She will be loud. Your father will be terrified. They will try to pull you back into the emotional chaos. Do not let them. He turned his clear, gray eyes on me. No haste, Laura. No anger. Order is our weapon. Let them scream. We will work. That night, back in the quiet attic, the silence felt different. It was not the empty, sterile silence of my own apartment, which always felt like a held breath. This was a heavy, weighted silence, the air thick with the smell of old paper, floor wax, and the distant hum of the city. The legal filings were complete. Rowan had filed the motion for the TRO and the asset injunction at precisely 3 o'clock that afternoon. The machine was now moving, its gears turning independent of my feelings. At this very moment, a process server was likely walking up the manicured stone path to my father's house in New Albany, a white envelope in his hand. With the external battle lines drawn and the first shots fired, the internal ones began to surface. My mind, now that it had a framework for the present, inevitably began to sift through the past. A strategist cannot just know what happened. They must understand how. How did the foundation become so rotten that the entire structure was ready to collapse from a single, well-placed blow? I closed my eyes, and the memories, the ones I had spent a decade at Stoneflower Strategies suppressing with long hours and complex analytics, flooded back. Lynette hadn't arrived in our lives like a storm. She arrived like a new, invasive species of flora. At first, it was all warmth, light, and suffocating. Sweet perfume. I was 11. Caroline, my stepsister-to-be, was 9. Our mother had been gone for nearly a year, and the house had become a gray, stagnant pool of unspoken grief and takeout boxes. My father, Robert Schultz, was a ghost in his own home. Lynette arrived with bright floral arrangements, new, cream-colored furniture, and a dazzling, high-wattage smile that seemed to fix everything it landed on. She laughed easily. She complimented my father's suits. She reorganized the kitchen in a single afternoon. The rules started subtly. They were never presented as rules. They were preferences. They were the framework for a new, better, happier life. "Oh, Laura, darling," she'd said one afternoon, her voice a soft coo as she looked at a photograph of my mother and me. "Your mother was so simple, wasn't she?" She introduced a system of emotional rewards and punishments that was as brilliant as it was toxic. Affection was a currency, and it was only dispensed for compliance. Caroline, who was softer and needier by nature, adapted instantly. She learned to bargain for this new, conditional affection. She mirrored Lynette, praised her cooking, fetched her magazines. In return, Caroline was showered with public adoration. "What a wonderful, helpful girl you are, Caroline. You have such a bright, happy nature, just like me. You and we'll go shopping this weekend." I did not. I was quiet. I was independent. I was, fatally, still inactive, silent grief for my mother. I didn't want new, bright clothes. I didn't want to be a helper. I just wanted to read my books in my room and be left alone. My independence was not seen as a virtue. In Lynette's new kingdom, it was seen as a rejection, a threat. My silence was not grief. It was sullenness. My self-sufficiency was not resilience. It was stubbornness. And my father, my kind, gentle, terminally conflict-averse father, he was just so relieved. He was a decent man, but he was a weak one, hollowed out by loss and terrified of confrontation. Lynette's arrival meant the house was clean again. It meant meals were on time. It meant someone else was managing the difficult, messy emotions of two grieving girls. He saw her efficiency as strength. He mistook her control for love. He didn't see the strategy. He handed her the house keys first. Then he gave her access to the household bank accounts. Then the scheduling of his entire life. And finally, without even realizing it, he handed her the right to define his reality. He gave her the keys to his home, and she, piece by piece, changed all the locks. My silence became my sin. Every family needs a narrative, and Lynette was a master storyteller. In her story, Caroline was the good, salvaged daughter. I was the broken one, the lost cause. I was moody. I was difficult. I was ungrateful. I was just like my mother, which was always delivered with a theatrical sigh of pity that made it, unequivocally, a curse. Every household error, every logistical mistake, somehow found its way to my feet. I became the designated scapegoat. Why? Because I didn't fight back in the way she understood. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just endured. I absorbed the blame because it was easier than engaging in her exhausting emotional marketplace. I remember one instance with the clarity of a photograph. I was 16. Lynette was helping my father organize his business contacts for a potential merger. She was working from home, her laptop open on the pristine, cream-colored dining room table. She called me in. "Laura, be a dear. I finished the spreadsheet. It's on the desktop, called Contacts Final. Please email it to this address." She handed me a business card. I did, exactly as she asked. I attached the file. I sent it. I went back to my room. An hour later, the house exploded. She was on the phone in the kitchen, her voice thick with performative, crocodile tears. I can't believe it. The wrong file. It had all the private financials, all the sensitive projections. "Oh, Robert, I don't know what to do. I'm ruined." My father rushed home, his face pale with panic. Lynette hung up the phone and dropped her head into her hands, her shoulders shaking. I just asked her to send one file. My blood ran cold. I came out of my room. "What are you talking about? I sent the file you pointed to, the one named Contacts Final." Her head snapped up, and her eyes, for a split second, were not filled with sadness. They were filled with pure, cold venom. "Don't you dare try to blame me, Laura," she hissed. "You know how much pressure I'm under. You were probably distracted. You were probably rushing on your computer. You've always been careless." And just like that, the narrative was set. The truth was irrelevant. My father, frantic, was on the phone with his partners, doing damage control. Caroline was rubbing Lynette's back, glaring at me. "How could you, Laura? You know how hard she's been working." Lynette was the victim, sacrificing herself for the family's future. I was the stubborn, careless, destructive force that had, once again, made her life impossible. I stood in the doorway, holding the absolute, verifiable truth, and it didn't matter. It was my word against her performance. I had no strategy. I just had the facts. And in that house, the facts were secondary to the emotion. I was labeled stubborn for even trying to defend myself. I learned, then, to stop defending. I learned to be silent. My silence became my armor. But as I sat in that attic, I realized it had also become my cage. I retreated. I focused on school. I got into stoneflower strategies. I built a life outside that house. A life where facts did matter, where analytics were king, and where strategy, not emotion, won the day. Of my grandfather, I had almost nothing. Just one, fleeting image, hazy and warm. I must have been very small, maybe 3 or 4, before the Great Schism. He was holding me. I remember the scratchy texture of a wool coat and the sharp, clean smell of cedar. I remember his hands were huge and felt rough, but incredibly safe. And then, he was gone. A forbidden name. A ghost. The man who had disowned his son. Now, the ghost was back. He had returned, not with apologies or emotional speeches, but with the rules. He brought with him a game that had been meticulously planned in 1978, a game where the facts were the only thing that mattered. My grandfather was asleep on the main room's cot, his breathing the slow, steady rhythm of a man with a clear conscience. I sat at the desk, the small, leather-bound book in my hands, not the ledger from the bank. This was the other one, the one he had pulled from his coat pocket in the hallway, the one that was worn at the corners. I opened it. It was my grandmother's. It was a journal, part garden log, part diary, but in the margins of pages detailing planting schedules for roses and almonds, in her elegant, faded blue ink, were other notes. They were not about flowers. February 10th. R. is afraid again. The partners are pushing him on the Texas deal. He signed. I told him not to sign without JWW. He did it anyway. May 4th. He is giving in to them. He says it is for peace. It is not peace. It is surrender. My hand trembled. I flipped to a page near the end. The date written in a darker, heavier hand. November 1st. One of the worst days. He let them call me a liar in his own home. He stood there and he said nothing. He is a good man, but he is a coward. I will not let this cowardice ruin my son. I will not let it ruin my grandchildren. I spoke to JW today. We are creating the orchard, a firewall, a place where strength is the only currency. I ran my finger over the words, a firewall. I was not the first woman in this family to be called a liar in my own home. I was not the first to watch a man I loved choose peace over truth. I was just the first one who had been handed the tools to fight back. My grandmother, all those years ago, had seen the crack in her son's foundation. She had anticipated a predator like Lynette. She had laid the legal mine. Lynette, with her arrogance and her rage, had just stepped on it, and my grandfather, he had just returned to hand me the detonator. I closed the journal. The attic was cold, but I didn't feel it. For 31 years, I had been the problem, the scene maker, the difficult one. I had been told, in 1,000 different ways, that my existence was an inconvenience. I had been told to apologize for simply being. When I walked into that courtroom, I would have the high-definition video of the assault. I would have the medical report detailing the laceration. I would have the forged power of attorney and the trail of stolen wire transfers. I would have the trust from 1978 and the deed to an almond orchard in Texas. I would have my grandmother's words in my pocket and my grandfather at my side. I would speak, I would be clear, and I would not, ever again, apologize for existing. The days that followed were not emotional, they were investigative. Rowan Pierce did not operate on anger or righteousness. He operated on data. The attic above the bookstore became our war room. We had the law on our side, but as my grandfather had said, we would not win with volume, we would win with evidence, by building a case so structurally sound that it would be impossible to refute. We began with the pillars of the case, the assault itself. The video footage, Rowan said, hitting play on his laptop. We were gathered around my grandfather's desk, the screen casting a cold blue light on our faces. The footage from my apartment hallway was grainy, time-stamped, and utterly damning. There was no audio, but there didn't need to be. It showed me opening the door. It showed Lynette brushing past me, her body language aggressive. It showed the conversation, her face contorting. It showed her taking a step forward, and then her hand, a pale blur, swinging in a short, vicious arc. It showed my head snapping to the side, my body stumbling back against the doorframe. It showed, in clear, undeniable detail, that I had not raised a hand, had not moved toward her, had not provoked the attack in any physical way. It was clean. It was absolute. This, Rowan said, pausing the frame on Lynette's face, her expression a mask of pure, unrestrained rage, is our foundation, unprovoked battery. Paired with this, he continued, sliding a thin report across the desk. It was the medical exam from Dr. Aris, dated the day after the attack. I had read it, but seeing it in the context of the video made it concrete. The language was cold, medical, and precise. Contusion and minor laceration to the left zygomatic arch and upper lip. Injury pattern consistent with blunt force trauma, matching the timeline of the alleged incident. The video shows the action. The medical report confirms the consequence, my grandfather murmured, nodding slowly. Order. But this is what seals it, Rowan said, picking up a thin stack of papers. My investigator paid a visit to your neighbor, Mr. Henderson. I felt a flash of the previous night's bitterness. He closed the door. He did, Rowan agreed. He was terrified. He's an elderly man. And Lynette, as he put it, looked like she was ready to kill. He didn't want to get involved, but he's also a man who hates bullies. Rowan tapped the top page. It was a sworn affidavit. He didn't need to see the slap. He heard the entire exchange. His door was cracked open. He confirms he saw you bleeding. He confirms he saw Lynette standing over you. And he confirms, under oath, what he heard her scream just before the impact. Rowan read the line from the statement. Witness states, he heard Ms. Lynette Schultz yell, "I will teach you to shut your mouth," immediately followed by a loud slapping sound and Ms. Laura Schultz crying out. I closed my eyes. The sound of Mr. Henderson's door closing had felt like a betrayal, but his words, captured on paper, were a different kind of key. They provided intent. This wasn't a family squabble that got out of hand. It was an attack meant to silence me. It linked the violence directly to the coercion. This is the trifecta, Rowan said. Video, medicals, and a third-party witness. The trio is solid. The judge will grant it without a second thought. But this, he tapped the desk, is just about the slap. Now, let's talk about the why. He turned his attention to the silver USB drive from 1978. I had our forensic audio team clean this up. There was more on it than we first thought. The drive, as you said, has 3 tracks. He played the first one. It was the one I'd heard in the attic. My grandfather and his lawyer discussing the moral clause, the tripwire based on proven physical violence. It was the legal framework. Now listen to this, Rowan said, clicking the second file. The speakers hissed. This was a different recording. The quality far worse. It sounded like a pocket recorder. Muffled. A man's voice, not my grandfather's, and a woman's. Her voice was unfamiliar, with a sharp, calculating edge. The shares are not the issue, the woman's voice said, the hiss almost overwhelming her words. The issue is control. The marriage is the only non-negotiable arrangement. He'll sign. He's weak. He'll sign to make it stop. It's coercion, plain and simple, the man replied. It's a merger, darling, the woman laughed, a sound like glass breaking. He gets access. I get the shares. It's just business. I looked at my grandfather. His face was pale, his brow furrowed. I don't recognize that voice, he said, his own voice troubled. This wasn't part of my meeting. This was recorded separately. It was appended to your file, Rowan said. It seems your lawyer, or someone in his office, was keeping a private file on other family business. This discussion of a forced marriage for shares. It establishes a historical pattern of coercion. It suggests this isn't the first time a woman has leveraged weakness for financial gain in your family. Mr. Schultz, Lynette isn't an anomaly. She's a repeat of a business model. My blood ran cold. This was deeper. This was a sickness in the family tree. And finally, Rowan said, playing the third track, it was just a series of beeps, followed by my grandfather's voice, reading a string of numbers and letters. It's not a code. It is a file locator, my grandfather said, his eyes lighting with sudden, cold understanding. Wren Harbor, our holding company, it has one other asset, a storage archive. Orchard isn't just the name of the trust, it's the name of the file system. Rowan had already done the work. A court order, citing the financial abuse investigation, had granted him access to the Wren Harbor Holdings archive in a climate-controlled storage facility in Westerville. Inside, among boxes of old agricultural deeds and tax returns, was a single, sealed document box labeled Orchard, Draft Will, JWS. Rowan placed a notarized copy on the desk. It was a draft of my grandfather's will, dated 1979, just after the trust was finalized. He had apparently, and wisely, never filed it, keeping it as a private contingency plan. The language was stark. It was a fail-safe for his fail-safe. It stated, in clear terms, that in the event his son, Robert Schultz, fell under coercive domestic influence that resulted in a misappropriation of family assets or physical harm to his designated heirs, his primary inheritance would be bypassed. The full controlling interest of the Schultz family holdings would pass directly to his firstborn legal grandchild, me. He didn't just build a firewall, Laura, Rowan said, his voice quiet. He built an escape hatch, and he put your name on the door. Now, we had the full picture. My grandfather and I sat with Rowan as he sketched it out on a large whiteboard in his office, the logic clear and brutal. We start with the motive, Rowan said, writing Lynette, financial fraud, at the top. We have the wire transfers from your father's accounts to her blue Asteria shell, but we needed to know when he signed. We subpoenaed his hospital records from 2 years ago. He held up a single sheet, the nurse's medication log. Here, your father was given a 3 milligram dose of lorazepam for pre-procedural anxiety. Standard. But here, he pointed. 2 hours later, post-op. He was administered another 4 milligrams. That's an extraordinary dose of sedative for a man his size, especially post-anesthesia. 20 minutes later, he held up the photograph from the bank vault. She had him sign the medical power of attorney. He wasn't just groggy, Laura. He was medically and legally incapacitated. That signature isn't just forged or coerced. It's null. It's a crime. The timeline became horrifyingly clear. 1, Rowan said, writing on the board. Lynette secures the fraudulent POA. She begins systematically draining his accounts. 2, she gets paranoid. She knows what she's doing is illegal. She starts to see you, the smart one, the outside one, as a threat. Rowan held up another document, a phone bill. Not mine, Lynette's. She hired a private investigator, last week, to follow you. Laura, to see who you were meeting with. She was trying to find out if you were on to her. I felt sick. She was watching me. Which brings us to the final piece, Rowan said. She was getting sloppy, or, more likely, she was trying to bind her daughter to the conspiracy. The investigator's invoice wasn't paid by Lynette's credit card. He slid the final paper across the table, an invoice for discreet surveillance services. It was addressed to, and paid by, a credit card belonging to Ms. Caroline Schultz. I stared at it, the text from my stepsister. It's less stress for Dad. You know how you get. Flashed in my mind. She wasn't just repeating Lynette's words. She wasn't a silent, passive victim. She was an active, knowing accomplice. She was funding the surveillance of her own stepsister to protect the family's peace and the flow of stolen money. "The timeline is complete," Rowan said. "Lynette, paranoid and cornered, hires a PI, with Caroline's help, to watch you. They find nothing, which only makes her more desperate. She orchestrates your exclusion from the birthday. When you don't react, she can't stand it. She needs to know what you're thinking. She comes to your apartment to intimidate you, to put you in your place, to teach you to shut your mouth. And in that single, arrogant, violent moment, she activated the clause," I finished, my voice a whisper. "She handed us the keys to the entire kingdom," Rowan corrected. "The slap wasn't the beginning, it was the end. It was the final, stupid mistake of a cornered amateur." My phone had been buzzing on the desk for the entire meeting. A constant, frantic, desperate stream of texts and missed calls. Caroline: "Dad is a wreck. How could you do this to him?" Caroline: "Rowan Pierce? Are you insane? You are tearing this family apart." Dad: "Laura, my accounts are frozen. I can't even buy groceries. What have you done? Please, call me. Just stop this." Caroline: "You're a monster. Mom is having a panic attack. You're killing her." I looked at the screen, at the blue and gray bubbles of their manufactured panic. I felt nothing. No rage, no sadness, no desire to explain. The emotional marketplace Lynette had built was closed for business. I calmly, methodically, took a screenshot of every single text. I documented every missed call. I attached them to a new email to Rowan. Subject: Supplementary evidence. Coercion and harassment. 1530. I typed one line in the body. For the file, please instruct them again to cease all direct contact. I hit send. My grandfather watched me, a small, almost imperceptible smile touching the corners of his mouth. "Good," he said. "They are playing their game. We will play ours." I turned my phone over on the desk, silencing the buzzing. The data was collected. The logic was sound. The next move was ours. The family mediation, as Lynette's lawyer had termed it, was not a request. It was a strategic, desperate gambit. After 2 days of having her credit cards decline and her bank accounts flash "access denied," she had clearly been advised that a full-blown court battle starting with elder financial abuse and battery was a bad look. She had, through her lawyer to Rowan, graciously offered a single, final opportunity to resolve this unfortunate misunderstanding without further damaging the family. Rowan had advised against it. "It's a trap. She's going to perform for your father. Try to emotionally blackmail you and get you to retract." "I know," I had said, my voice quiet. "That's why we're going. But we are not going to mediate. We are going to present our findings." "As a courtesy," my grandfather added, his voice dry as paper, "before the discovery motions become public." So we drove to New Albany, to the house I had grown up in, the house my mother had decorated, the house Lynette had stripped bare and remade in her own image of cold, cream-colored minimalism. It was a sprawling, sterile monument to new money, and I hated every inch of it. Rowan, my grandfather, and I walked up the stone path. I felt a flicker of the old, familiar dread, the tightening in my stomach that always came before I had to see her. I instinctively started to hunch my shoulders, to make myself smaller. My grandfather, walking beside me, tapped my elbow with one firm finger. I looked at him. His back was ramrod straight, his chin high. "Order, Laura," he murmured, not looking at me. "You are not a guest here. You are an auditor." I took a deep breath. I straightened my spine. I was not the family problem. I was the lead strategist. And this was a hostile negotiation. This was a hostile negotiation. My father, Robert Schultz, opened the door. He looked terrible. His eyes were red-rimmed and baggy, his skin pale. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in 2 days, his entire world unraveled. When he saw me, his face crumpled with a complex, pathetic mix of relief and fear. "Laura," he breathed, reaching for me. Oh, Laura, thank God. Please, come in. Let's just fix this. I did not move into his embrace. I simply stepped past him into the foyer. Hello, Dad. The air in the house was suffocating, thick with the smell of Lily's and Lynette's expensive, cloying perfume. They were waiting for us in the formal dining room, the one room in the house designed not for living, but for confrontations and performative holiday dinners. The vast, polished mahogany table was a dark, reflective mirror. Lynette was at the head of the table, flanked by a slick, expensive-looking lawyer I didn't recognize. Caroline was beside her, her face pale and blotchy, her eyes red from what looked like genuine, terrified tears. Lynette herself was a masterpiece of contrived victimhood. She was dressed in a soft, white cashmere sweater, her makeup pale and artfully distressed. She looked fragile, wounded, and utterly terrified. A performance so complete it was almost brilliant. The moment she saw me, she pressed a delicate hand to her chest. "Laura," she whispered, her voice trembling for the benefit of all. "Oh, thank heaven you're here. We've all been so terribly worried." We sat down, Rowan, my grandfather, and I on one side, Lynette, her lawyer, and Caroline on the other. My father stood awkwardly at the end of the table, a ghost at his own feast. Rowan placed his briefcase on the table and clicked it open. From his pocket, he slid a small digital audio recorder onto the polished wood and pressed the record button. The small red light was a defiant, ruby eye. Lynette's lawyer, a man who introduced himself as Mr. Vance, immediately bristled. "This is a private, good-faith mediation. All recordings are inadmissible and, frankly, insulting." "This is not a mediation, Mr. Vance," Rowan said, his voice flat and cold. "This is a pre-litigation disclosure meeting. We are here, at your client's request, to present the evidence that will form the basis of our civil and potential criminal complaints. Everything said here is on the record. You may proceed." Vance looked at Lynette, who gave a small, trembling nod. The performance was back on. "Laura," Lynette began, her voice catching. She didn't look at me, but at my father. "Robert, darling, please, tell her what this is doing to you. Tell her how much she's hurt you." My father shifted. "Laura, please, this is a misunderstanding. Your grandfather." He shot a terrified look at the end of the table. "He's filling your head with things. Old, angry things. Lynette, she's a good woman. She loves me. She loves this family." "She loves your bank accounts," my grandfather said, his voice quiet but carrying across the table like a crack of ice. "That's not true," Caroline burst out, her voice high and thin. "She saved this family. She saved Dad. You just hate her because you're jealous. You've always been jealous." Lynette placed a calming hand on Caroline's arm. "Shh, darling, it's all right. She doesn't mean it. She's just confused." She finally turned her gaze to me. It was a masterwork of pained, forgiving motherhood. "Laura, whatever you think happened, I forgive you. For the anger, for the terrible things you've said, for all of this." She gestured to Rowan, to the recorder. "All I ask, all your father asks, is that you apologize. Apologize for bringing these strangers," she sneered at Rowan, "into our home. Apologize for hurting your father, and we can put this all behind us. We can be a family again." The room was silent. My father was watching me, his eyes pleading. "Please, Laura, just do it. Just make this stop." I looked at Lynette. I looked at her soft white sweater, her trembling hand, her carefully constructed mask of the victim, and I felt nothing. The old, familiar acid of guilt, the urge to apologize, to make myself small, was gone. I reached into the briefcase beside me. I did not speak. I did not raise my voice. I pulled out the first item, a clear, plastic-encased 8x10 photograph. It was a high-definition, time-stamped still from my hallway security camera. I placed it in the center of the table and slid it across the polished mahogany until it stopped directly in front of her. It was the frame capturing the exact moment of impact. Her face contorted in rage, my head snapping back. "This is the unprovoked assault," I said, my voice clear and steady. I reached in again. I pulled out the medical report from Dr. Eris. I slid it across the table. "This is the medical confirmation of the laceration and contusion." I pulled out the sworn affidavit from Mr. Henderson. I slid it across the table. "This is the third-party witness testimony, confirming he heard you threaten to teach me to shut my mouth." I pulled out the drive with the full video file. I placed it on the table with a quiet click. "And this is the full, unedited recording of the event." Lynette's lawyer, Vance, stared at the pile. His starched smile had vanished. Lynette's face had gone from wounded to wary. This is a disproportionate response to a minor family argument," Vance stammered, trying to regain control. "A slap on the wrist, in a moment of high emotion." It was not a slap on the wrist. My grandfather's voice cut in. He, too, reached into his briefcase. He pulled out the dark blue, leather-bound portfolio, the original Schultz Orchard Trust. He didn't slide it. He opened it. He turned it to face Lynette, his long, bony finger tapping a single paragraph on a page yellowed with age. "Article 14, he said, his voice resonating in the quiet room. "The Domestic Conduct Clause, drafted by my wife in 1978, it states that any party in a position of guardianship or spousal control who enacts proven physical battery or coercive control against a designated heir, that would be Laura, has all rights of access, management, and inheritance related to this trust immediately and permanently suspended." Lynette's mask didn't just crack, it fell. She let out a short, sharp, ugly laugh. That's insane. You think that dusty old piece of paper, that antique trust, it's meaningless. It's invalid. Robert and I, our lawyers, we consolidated everything years ago." She looked at her lawyer, Vance, for confirmation, but he was staring, pale-faced, at the document. Rowan spoke, his voice almost cheerful. "That's what we thought you might say, Ms. Schultz, which is why." He reached into his own case. "We have this." He slid a second, newer, blue-bound document across the table. "This is the notarized renewal of the trust, signed and filed in the state of Ohio in 2002. The year before you married Robert, the Domestic Conduct Clause was not only preserved, it was strengthened." Lynette's face went white. She had checked the original, but she had never known about the renewal. You can't prove any of this," Caroline suddenly shrieked, her voice cracking with panic. You've been secretive. You've been plotting. We were just worried about you." "Is that why you hired a private investigator to follow me last week, Caroline?" I asked, my voice genuinely curious. Caroline froze, her mouth falling open. Rowan slid another set of papers onto the pile. The invoice, the credit card receipts. "We have the invoices from discreet surveillance services. Caroline, paid in full from your personal American Express card, an act which, I'm afraid, legally moves you from worried family member to knowing accomplice in a conspiracy to defraud the trust." Caroline let out a small, strangled sob and looked at her mother. You said it was just for her protection." "Robert," Lynette snarled, her voice dropping all pretense of fragility. "Are you going to let them do this? Are you going to let this old man and this girl destroy your family?" My father, who had been shrinking against the wall, finally spoke. "Laura, Whitaker, please," he begged, his voice watery. "This is enough. We can put the money back. We can sort this out. Please, just stop. Don't do this." My grandfather turned his head, very slowly, and looked at his son. His voice was not angry. It was filled with a vast, ancient, profound disappointment. "Robert, you have been silent for far too long. You were silent when they planned this. You were silent when they forged your name. He held up the photograph of the fraudulent POA. You were silent when they stole from you, and you were silent when they attacked your daughter. Your silence is what you have been hiding behind your entire life. It is not peace. It is cowardice, and it ends today. Lynette stood up, her chair scraping violently against the wood floor. Her face was no longer pale. It was a dark, mottled red. The mask was gone. This was the woman from my hallway. You will not, she hissed, pointing a trembling finger at me. Get away with this. This is slander. This is defamation. I will sue you for everything you have. I will sue you until you are nothing. Please do, Rowan said, smiling brightly as he hit the stop button on his recorder. In fact, we welcome it. The discovery process will be wonderfully illuminating. We're especially keen to depose you under oath regarding Blue Asteria Holdings and the forged power of attorney. My office will accept service on Laura's behalf. The room was still. The air was electric, vibrating with unspent rage and total, devastating defeat. Lynette stared at me, her eyes filled with a hatred so pure, so absolute, it was almost beautiful. We stood. Rowan packed his recorder. My grandfather closed the blue portfolio. We had presented our facts. The negotiation was over. As we turned to leave, my grandfather paused. He reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out the heavy, black, antique iron key, the key from the bank box, the key he had shown me in the hallway. He walked not to Lynette, but to me. In the middle of that sterile, cream-colored dining room, in front of my father, my stepsister, and the woman who had tried to erase me. He placed the heavy iron key in the palm of my hand and closed my fingers around it. This, he said, his voice for my ears only, though everyone in the room heard it, is for the farm in Texas, your farm. I looked down at the key. It was heavy. It was real. I looked up. I saw Lynette's face. The hatred was gone. It had been replaced, instantly, by something far more profound. Pure, cold, bottomless panic. I hadn't understood. I had thought the farm was just another asset, but the look in her eyes, she knew something about that farm, the farm in Texas, the one in my name, the one that had always been in my name. It wasn't just an asset. It was connected to something else. It was connected to the money she had been stealing, the money she had been hiding, the money she thought was safe. No one spoke. My father wouldn't meet my eyes. Caroline was weeping silently into her hands. Lynette stood frozen, her face a mask of absolute paralyzing horror. No one had backed down. No one had changed their mind. The mediation had failed, just as we knew it would. The final battle would be in court, and we had just drawn first blood. Rowan filed the injunctions, and the court date was set. The immediate fire, Lynette's access to the accounts, her ability to contact me, was contained. But the war was not won. The look of sheer, unadulterated panic in her eyes when my grandfather gave me that key was an anomaly, a data point that didn't fit. Her panic was not just about losing my father's money. It was about the farm. The key felt heavy in my pocket, a physical weight that represented a piece of the puzzle I didn't understand. She's been using it, I said to my grandfather that night, standing in the quiet attic. The farm, that's why she was so terrified. It's not just an asset she wanted. It's an asset she's been actively using. He nodded, his face grim in the lamplight. Wren and Harbor Holdings was a storage company, but the Orchard Trust, that's an active business, an almond farm. It produces, it has income, it has books. And she's been cooking them, I finished. We have to go. 2 days later, we were in his old, impeccably maintained sedan, driving south. The tight, gray, claustrophobic skies of Ohio finally broke somewhere over the Arkansas border. By the time we crossed into Texas, the world had changed. The sky was an immense, high, open blue, so vast it made the car feel tiny. Our entire family drama a speck of dust in a sunbeam. We drove for hours with the windows down. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just breathing, I was inhaling. We arrived in Caldwell County as a late afternoon storm was clearing. The farm wasn't a quaint, rustic fantasy. It was a serious, sprawling, professional operation. Thousands of acres of almond trees, organized in perfect, endless rows, their leaves glistening from the rain. The air was thick with the most incredible smell. Not perfume, not food, but something elemental, the smell of damp, rich earth, of wet wood, and a faint, sweet hint of vegetation. It was the smell of life. It was the smell of clean. And as I stepped out of the car, I felt like 20 years of grit and emotional grime were being washed from my skin. A man was waiting for us on the porch of the main office, a simple, white-planked building. He was older than my grandfather, his skin a testament to a lifetime under the Texas sun, his hands thick and calloused. He wore simple jeans and a work shirt. My grandfather extended his hand. "Elias, it has been a very long time." The man, Elias, took his hand. He didn't smile. He just nodded, his eyes sharp and assessing. "Mr. Whitaker, I wondered if you'd ever come back." His gaze shifted to me. It was not a kind gaze, but it was not unkind. It was, like my grandfather's, an appraisal. "This," my grandfather said, "is Laura Schultz, my granddaughter. She is the beneficiary of the trust." Elias looked at me for a long, quiet moment. Then, a slow, deep smile cracked across his weathered face. "So, you're the one. You have your grandmother's eyes." He turned. "Well, come on in. The books are where she told me to keep 'em. Been waiting for someone with her eyes to come and ask for 'em." The office was simple, functional, and clean, and in a locked, dry storage room in the back, Elias showed us the records. Not just the last few years, decades of them. "Your grandma, Ms. Evelyn," Elias said, pulling a heavy leather-bound ledger from a shelf. "She loved this place. Your grandfather." He nodded respectfully at J.W. "He bought it, but she built it. She's the one who saw the future in almonds, not timber. She's the one who laid out the irrigation, and she's the one who set up the trust." He looked at me, his gaze intense. "That law, the one in the paper, the one about trouble, that was her idea." I looked at my grandfather. He was watching Elias, his face quiet, and he nodded. "I had the lawyers," my grandfather said, his voice soft. "But Evelyn, she had the foresight. She was the one who said, 'A contract can protect us from the outside, J.W., but what protects us from the inside? What protects the future from our own blood?' She came down here after a bad visit, back in Ohio," Elias continued, his hand resting on the ledger. "She looked tired. She said, 'Elias, if a man raises his voice, it's a storm, but if he raises his hand, it's a poison, and it must be cut out at the root.' She went back to Ohio and had the lawyers put that clause in. She was protecting this place. She was protecting you." I ran my hand over the journal my grandmother had kept, the one my grandfather had given me. I opened it to the page I had marked. "I will not let this cowardice ruin my grandchildren." "I've been reading her journals," I said to Elias, "but I don't understand. Why did he leave?" I looked at my grandfather. "Why did you leave? She needed you." My grandfather was silent for a long time, staring out the window at the rows of trees. This farm was part of a larger portfolio, the timber, the processing plants. Back in the 80s, your father, he was ambitious. He brought in new partners. They wanted to expand, to modernize, which was fine. He paused. But then they wanted to finance that expansion by diversifying the assets. They wanted to use the timber company as a shell, to move money for some very unsavory people. "A dirty deal," I whispered, the words from the outline echoing in my mind. "It was a laundering operation," he said, his voice flat. "I refused. I was the controlling partner. I blocked the deal. It cost the partners, and your father, a great deal of money. Your father did not take it well. He and we had a fundamental disagreement. In the boardroom, he accused me of being a relic, of being a spoiler, a saboteur, who was trying to ruin his future." He looked at me. his eyes filled with a cold, ancient sadness. And then, I heard your grandmother's voice in my head. What protects us from our own blood? I saw Lynette in the background. She was his assistant then. I saw her watching him. I saw her ambition. And I knew if I stayed and fought him, I would break him. I would force him to choose. And he was my son. I could not be the one to destroy him. So you left, I said. So I left, he confirmed. I chose to be silent. I thought it was the only way to protect him, to let him have his life. I transferred the primary control of the trust to a third party, and I walked away. I did not realize, until it was too late, that in leaving him, I had left you. The room was quiet. Elias looked at me. Your grandmother, she was heartbroken, but she never stopped working. She renewed that trust, and she told me, keep the real books, Elias. Keep them safe. One day, someone with my eyes will come and ask for them. And it seems she was right. He pulled out another, newer-looking set of ledgers. This is what Ms. Lynette has been doing. For the next 4 hours, the world shrank to that back room. It was all there. My grandfather and I, with my stoneflower training, laid the documents out on the floor. It was a masterpiece of simple, elegant fraud. Lynette, using the fraudulent POA, had installed a new distribution company as the farm's sole partner. The company was called Blue Asteria Logistics. Blue Asteria, I breathed. The same shell she was wiring my father's money into. Of course, my grandfather said. She's been using his own money to finance her theft of the trust's money. It's a closed loop. The contracts were all there, signed with that same forged, arrogant signature. Blue Asteria Logistics would buy the entire almond harvest from the Schultz Orchard Trust for a fixed price, a price that was about 40% below market value. Blue Asteria would then sell that same harvest, on the open market, for its full value, pocketing the massive difference. She wasn't just skimming, she was gutting the farm, transferring its profits directly into her own pocket. The farm is the money, I said, the panic in her eyes finally making sense. This is her retirement plan. This is millions. My grandfather's face was white with a cold, contained fury. She hasn't just been stealing from Robert. She has been stealing from Evelyn. She has been stealing from you. I stood up. The old Laura, the girl in the hallway, would have been overwhelmed, sick, dizzy. The new Laura, the lead strategist, the owner of the farm, pulled out her phone. I am not an auditor, I said, my voice steady. But I know who is. I dialed the number for Brightline Audits, a firm in Dallas I'd worked with on a hostile takeover case 2 years prior. I got the senior partner on his cell. Marcus, I said. It's Laura Schultz. I'm in Caldwell County, at a family asset. I've just uncovered a massive, multi-year, multi-million-dollar fraud scheme, including parallel contracts and a shell corporation. I need a full forensic team. I need you to lock the books, seize all digital records, and create an unassailable chain of custody. This is for a federal court filing. How soon can you be here? There was a pause. Tomorrow, 6 a.m., he said. I hung up. I looked at Elias. Until they arrive, this room is sealed. No one enters or leaves. Yes, ma'am, he said, and for the first time, he smiled. We spent the evening in the main farmhouse, a simple, beautiful, real home. My phone, which had been buzzing intermittently with blocked calls from Ohio, lit up with a new text. It was my father. Laura, I know you're angry, but please, just a coffee. We can talk. Just us. No lawyers. Please don't sue. You've made your point. You're ruining us. I looked at the message, the familiar toxic pull. Please, Laura, don't make a big deal. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel guilt. I just felt tired of it. I showed the text to my grandfather. He is offering you peace, my grandfather said, on his terms. I pressed my thumb to the screen and deleted the message. I did not reply. I was learning to say no, not with my voice, but with my silence. My silence was no longer a cage, it was a boundary. Later that night, my grandfather sat with me at the heavy oak dining table. He had my grandmother's journal and a beautiful, old-fashioned fountain pen. "You're a strategist, Laura," he said, uncapping the pen. "You work in a digital world, but people like Lynette, they work in the physical one, forgery, coercion." He opened the journal to a blank page. "They will try to change the past. They will swap pages. They will forge signatures." He showed me the nib of the pen. A ballpoint floats on the surface, a fountain pen. It bites the paper. The ink soaks into the fiber. He handed me the pen. "When you sign something, you press down, you leave an indentation, you make the paper yours, you mark it in a way that cannot be erased." He showed me how to hold it, how to draw the ink, how to make a mark that was both elegant and permanent. The next morning, the auditors from Brightline arrived. They were fast, quiet, and merciless. By noon, they had the first set of preliminary findings. The fraud was, as Marcus put it, gloriously simple and deeply criminal. He placed the first set of documents in front of me. They were legal forms, declarations, affidavits, papers that officially installed me, Laura Schultz, as the acting head of the Trust's board, pending the final court ruling. Papers that gave me the power to fire the old distributors, Blue Asteria, and freeze all payments. "You need to sign these," Marcus said, "to give us the authority to act on your behalf." He handed me a cheap plastic ballpoint pen. I shook my head. "I have my own." I reached into my bag and pulled out my grandmother's fountain pen. I uncapped it. I opened the first file. I, Laura Schultz, being the designated heir. I looked at the line. I thought of the girl in the hallway. Her lips split, her voice silent. I thought of the girl in the dining room, being called stubborn and careless. I put the pen to the paper. I pressed down, just as my grandfather had taught me. I signed my name. My hand did not shake. We stayed in Texas for 3 more days. I worked with the auditors. I learned the farm from Elias, and I walked the rows of almond trees. When it was finally time to return to Ohio for the final hearing, I stood on the porch and looked out at the sky. It was vast, clear, and open. It was full of possibility. I was no longer the woman who had left Ohio a week ago. That woman was a victim. The woman returning, she was the owner. We returned to Ohio. Not to the attic, but to the Franklin County Courthouse. The air in Texas was open and clean. The air here was pressurized, smelling of stale coffee, floor wax, and low-grade anxiety. This was not the final trial. This was the preliminary injunction hearing. We were asking the court to officially recognize the activation of the Trust's clause and to legally freeze all assets Lynette controlled, pending the full criminal and civil trial. Lynette, her lawyer Vance, and Caroline were already there. The mask of the wounded victim was gone. Lynette's face was tight, her eyes burning with a cold. Pure hatred. She looked like a trapped animal. My father sat behind her, looking small and gray, a man hollowed out. We sat. Rowan organized his files. My grandfather sat beside me, his back straight, his hands folded on his cane. He was an anchor. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Maria Diaz, called the case. Rowan stood. He was not emotional. He was a surgeon. "Your Honor, we are here to petition for an emergency injunction based on 2 core arguments. First, the activation of a domestic conduct clause in a notarized, renewed trust, triggered by a documented physical assault. Second, overwhelming evidence of elder financial abuse, fraud, and undue influence." He submitted the assault package, the video, the medical report, the witness affidavit from Mr. Henderson. Vance, Lynette's lawyer, scrambled to his feet. "Your Honor, this is a family dispute, a regrettable argument that Ms. Schultz's estranged grandfather," he gestured dismissively at J.W., "is attempting to leverage for his own financial gain. That video is inadmissible, taken without my client's consent. It was taken in a public hallway, Counsel, where there is no expectation of privacy, Judge Diaz said, not looking up from the medical report. It is admissible. Sit down. Vance, sweating, pivoted, and this trust they speak of, this moral clause, we contest its validity entirely. And this, he pointed to the silver USB drive. They are submitting an audio recording from 1978. How can this possibly be relevant? It is hearsay. It is ancient. It is a theatrical prop. Rowan smiled, a thin, cold smile. Your Honor, if opposing counsel had read our filing, he would know we anticipated this. He placed a new file on the judge's bench. This is the full chain of custody report for the safe deposit box, establishing that the contents have been sealed since their last renewal in 2002, and this, he held up a disc, is the forensic audio verification from a court-certified lab, confirming the recording's authenticity and integrity. The USB is not hearsay. Your Honor, it is the notarized, archived legal instruction of the Trust's founders. Judge Diaz nodded, her expression grim. But the USB is just the contract, Your Honor. Rowan continued, his voice hardening. Now, let us turn to the motive. Why would Ms. Schultz assault my client? Because my client, she feared, was getting too close to discovering the real crime. Rowan's tone shifted. This was the kill shot. I submit into evidence the medical records of Mr. Robert Schultz. My father flinched. From 2 years ago, and I call the court's attention to the medication log. He projected it onto the screen. Here, we see a standard dose of lorazepam, but here, post-operation, we see an additional, non-standard dose of 4 milligrams administered, a dose that would render a man in his condition legally incapacitated, and 20 minutes later, Rowan clicked the slide. The forged power of attorney flashed on the screen. This is the document Ms. Schultz had her husband sign while he was, by all medical definitions, completely incoherent. This POA is not just invalid, Your Honor. It is a criminal act. It is the key she used to begin systematically looting his estate. Vance was on his feet, sputtering. Objection! This is inflammatory. This has nothing to do with the assault. It has everything to do with it, Your Honor. Rowan's voice cracked like a whip. Ms. Schultz began a multi-year fraud, but she became paranoid. She believed my client, a lead strategist, was on to her, so she hired a private investigator to illegally surveil her. Rowan clicked the slide again, Caroline's invoice, and she did it with the knowing financial assistance of her daughter, Caroline Schultz. This wasn't a family argument. This was an organized, multi-year conspiracy to commit fraud, culminating in an act of physical violence intended to silence the one person who could expose them. The courtroom was dead silent. Caroline had dissolved into quiet, terrified sobs. Lynette looked like she had been struck by lightning. Judge Diaz held up a hand. I have seen enough. She looked down at Lynette, her gaze cold as steel. This court finds sufficient, indeed overwhelming, evidence to grant the temporary injunction, all accounts, holdings, and properties controlled by Ms. Lynette Schultz, both individually and jointly with Mr. Robert Schultz, are hereby frozen. A court-appointed guardian will be assigned to manage Mr. Schultz's financial and medical affairs, pending a full competency hearing. The activation of the Schultz Orchard Trust's domestic conduct clause is preliminarily upheld. The assets of said trust are to be immediately remanded to the control of the designated heir, Ms. Laura Schultz. It was done, a clean cut. Rowan packed his briefcase. We stood. As we turned to leave, my father scrambled toward us, his face a mask of desperation. Laura, please, you've won. You've taken everything. Just stop this. Stop the criminal charges. It's just money. We can have peace. Please. Before I could answer, my grandfather stepped in front of me. Planting his cane on the marble floor, he looked at his son, his voice not loud, but carrying in the stunned silence of the hallway. Peace, Robert. Peace built on fear is a house without a foundation. You built no house. You only dug a hole. Now, you must lie in it." My father recoiled, as if struck. We walked past him, and then I heard her. "You?" The voice was low, guttural, vibrating with a rage that was almost chemical. I stopped. I turned. Lynette was standing 10 feet away, her lawyer trying to restrain her, her face a dark mottled purple. "You think you're so smart," she hissed, her voice loud enough for the entire hallway to hear. "You think you've won? This isn't over. You took my house. You took my life. I will destroy you. I will bury you, you little bitch." "Ms. Schultz, be silent," Vance pleaded, grabbing her arm. A man in a cheap suit, standing near the door, scribbled furiously in a notebook. A reporter, here for a different case, who had just stumbled onto a much better story. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine, and he knew he had the quote. Judge Diaz's bailiff stepped out. "Ms. Schultz, another word, and I will have you in contempt." Rowan gently pushed me toward the exit. "We're done here." The judge set the final trial date for 6 weeks out. She issued a stern warning against any and all witness tampering, her eyes fixed on Lynette. As we walked out into the cold, bright Ohio sunlight, Rowan was already on the phone with the district attorney's office. "I'm sending over the file now," he said. "Yes, criminal forgery, elder abuse, and, yes, a public threat, witnessed by a member of the press just now." We had won. We had taken the board. But as we got in the car, my grandfather looked at me, his face grim. "That was not a threat," he said. "That was a promise. A woman with nothing left to lose is a dangerous animal. She will not play by the rules now. She is cornered. She will make one, last, darker move." The 6 weeks leading up to the final hearing were not a reprieve. They were the tightening of a spring. The injunction held. Lynette was locked out of the accounts. The house in New Albany was in the hands of a court-appointed receiver, and the Texas farm was now firmly under my control. The auditors from Brightline Audits were methodically dismantling Lynette's entire fraudulent enterprise, feeding their findings directly to Rowan and the district attorney's office. But my grandfather was right. A cornered animal is a desperate one, and Lynette, having lost the war of law and finance, had shifted to a war of pure, chaotic malice. The first move was a quiet one. A plain manila envelope, with no return address, was slipped under the main door of the antiquarian bookstore, where my grandfather and I were still staying. He found it when he went to get the morning paper. Inside, there was no letter, just a single glossy photograph. It showed Lynette, smiling, sitting at a desk in a cheap-looking office. She was clinking a champagne glass with a man I didn't recognize, a slick, reptilian man with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. On the desk between them, clearly visible, was a document, my father's letterhead. It was titled, "Last Will and Testament of Robert L. Schultz." Taped to the back of the photo was a small typed note. "His name is Dominic Valenti. He was disbarred in 2019 for fraud. She's been seeing him for 3 months. She's faking the will." My grandfather and I took it straight to Rowan. "It's her ace in the hole," Rowan said, his voice quiet, almost impressed. "She knew the trust was a risk, so she created a backstop. If the court voided her rights under the trust, she would wait for your father to pass, and then produce a new, recently discovered will that superseded everything. A will that left the entire estate, what was left of it, to her." "It won't work," I said. "He's under court protection. He can't sign anything." "She doesn't need him to sign it now," Rowan said. "She's got a disbarred lawyer and a forged signature. She's going to backdate it, and a grieving widow producing a lost will. It's just enough mud to keep the estate tied up in probate for a decade." This photograph, I realized, was not a threat from Lynette. It was a warning. From whom? Someone she had crossed. Someone else she had burned. This new evidence unlocked the other, nagging piece of the puzzle. We went back to the attic. We listened to the silver USB drive again, not the first track. the one about the moral clause. We listened to the second one, the muffled recording from 1978, the one with the strange woman's voice. Her words, clear in the quiet attic, were no longer a mystery. They were a blueprint. The marriage is the only non-negotiable arrangement. He's weak. He'll sign. He'll sign to make it stop. I looked at my grandfather. My God, I whispered. It's a pattern. What is? Lynette. It's not the first time this has happened. That woman on the tape, she's just an earlier version of Lynette. She was talking about forcing a marriage to get shares. My grandmother saw it. She didn't just see the weakness in my father. She saw the type of predator his weakness attracted. She built the firewall and the trust not just for him, but for them, for this specific kind of monster. My grandfather's face was pale. Evelyn, she never told me the specifics. She just called it an internal vulnerability. It is a vulnerability, I said, and Lynette is just the most successful one, until now. Rowan Pierce did not wait. He did not file a motion. Armed with the photograph and the identity of the disbarred lawyer, he went straight to the DA and requested an emergency search warrant, not for Lynette, for Dominic Valenti. The DA, who was now building a significant criminal case, was happy to oblige. They raided Valenti's rented office 2 days later, and they found it all. They found the drafts of my father's new, fraudulent will, on high-quality, watermarked paper that matched my father's stationery. They found a set of custom-made, high-end stamps, a notary seal, identical to the one on my father's legitimate documents, but with a different, unregistered number. It was a forger's kit. Lynette wasn't just planning to argue in court. She was planning to commit blatant, high-level fraud. The bomb, intended to go off after the trial, had been defused. The news of the raid must have hit their camp like a shockwave. The first crack in the wall was Caroline. My phone, which had been blissfully silent, buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. Laura, it's Caroline. Please, I'm so sorry. I didn't know about any of this. The will, the forgery. She made me do the private investigator. She told me you were in trouble, that you were mixed up with a bad man. She said it was to protect you. I stared at the text. Another one came through, more frantic. She controlled all my money. I just did what she said. I was dragged into it. Please, I'll tell you everything. I'll testify. Just call off Rowan. Please don't let me go to prison. I felt a brief, cold flicker of pity. The girl who had learned to bargain for affection had just tried to bargain for her freedom, but the strategist in me had taken over. This was not a plea for forgiveness. This was a material witness trying to cut a deal. I did not reply. I did not call. I took a screenshot of the text exchange. I forwarded it to Rowan. Subject: Caroline Schultz, co-conspirator, willing to testify. Rowan's reply was simple. I'll have the DA send someone to pick her up. Her testimony will be invaluable. Good work. The final crack, the one that broke the foundation, came 2 nights before the hearing. It was almost dawn. I was at the desk in the attic, reviewing the final report from the Brightline auditors. The rain that had been lashing Columbus for weeks had finally stopped, leaving the city in a cold pre-dawn quiet. I heard a sound from downstairs, a soft, hesitant knocking on the bookstore's front door. My grandfather, who seemed to never sleep, was already at the window. He looked down. It is your father. I let him in. He looked like a man who had aged 20 years in 6 weeks. His expensive suit was rumpled, his eyes were bloodshot, and he smelled of stale whiskey. He was completely broken. He followed me up the stairs to the attic, his feet heavy. He stood in the middle of the room, under the bare bulb, looking at the maps, the ledgers, the files, our war room. Laura, he whispered. His voice was a raw croak. I just waited. I stood by the desk, my arms crossed. I would not make this easy for him. Tears began to stream down his face, silent and pathetic. I'm so sorry, he choked out. She had me. I didn't know what to do. You could have told the truth, I said. My voice was cold. It was a stranger's voice. I couldn't, he cried out. A small, desperate sound. She knew. She found out. Years ago, before your mother even passed. She found out about the debts. I waited. I had a problem, he stammered, looking at his shoes. I was gambling. I lost. A lot. I took money from the company, from the timber accounts. I told myself I would pay it back, but it got worse. My grandfather, who had been standing in the shadows, stepped forward. I blocked a deal, an expansion, in the 80s. Yes, my father said, latching onto it. Yes, you crippled us. I had partners. I had debts. I had to cover them. I embezzled $200,000. The number hung in the air. Lynette, he continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. She was my assistant. She found the transfer records. She found the second ledger. And she fixed it. She moved money from another account, covered the hole. She made it all go away. And she never said a word. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. Not for years. Not until she wanted the POA. Not until she wanted me to sign the new distribution contracts for the farm. And when I finally asked what she was doing, she showed me the records, the original transfer. She told me if I ever questioned her again, she would send them to the DA. She said she would ruin me. She said I would go to prison. I was trapped. Laura. He had traded his prison of debt for a prison of her making. He finally collapsed into the small wooden chair by the desk. He was a small, gray, weeping man, and I felt nothing, only a cold, sharp, clarifying anger. All this, my entire life, my isolation, the gaslighting, the slap. It was all to cover this, to cover the weakness of this one, pathetic man. The old Laura would have wept. She would have held him. She would have said, "It's okay, Dad. We'll fix it." The new Laura turned to the desk. She took out a fresh legal pad. She uncapped my grandmother's fountain pen. She slid the pad and the pen across the desk to him. What is this?" he wept. "It is a sworn statement," I said, my voice as flat and cold as the Ohio dawn outside. "Write it all down, everything you just said, the gambling, the embezzlement, the $200,000, the date she found out, the date she blackmailed you into signing the power of attorney. Write it all down, now." He stared at me, his face a mask of disbelief. "Laura, I'm your father. I'm telling you the truth. I'm apologizing." "I know," I said, "and I am giving you your only way out. You are a material witness to her criminal conspiracy. Right now, the court sees you as a victim. If you wait, they will see you as an accomplice. Write it down, sign it, and Rowan will use it to protect you. If you don't..." I shrugged. "You will go down with her." He looked at me, searching for the daughter he knew, the soft one, the one who always broke. She was gone. His hand shaking so badly he could barely hold the pen. He began to write. An hour later, he was gone. I was left alone in the attic, holding a 2-page, signed confession, the final, devastating piece of evidence. The night before the trial, the air in the city was still. The rain had stopped. The storm was over. But in my hand, my phone buzzed. A text from another burner number. "We know what your father wrote. We know what you have. We have the originals. 2. The bank records. The ones Lynette fixed. If you show that paper in court tomorrow, he goes to prison for embezzlement. We will go to the press. He will be destroyed. Your choice. Don't come." The final move, the last, desperate gambit, blackmail. I stared at the screen. This was the true test. This was not about money. This was about my father's life. They were daring me to pull the trigger. I walked over to my grandfather, who was reading by the lamplight. I showed him the phone. He read the text. He looked up at me, his clear gray eyes unblinking. "They are desperate," he said, his voice calm. "They are fighting with fear. It is the only weapon they have ever known." "If I use his confession, they'll expose him," I whispered. "He'll go to prison." "Will he?" my grandfather asked. "They are threatening you with the very truth you now hold. They are threatening to release the same information that Rowan is about to present to a judge. It is an illogical, panicked threat. They are bluffing. They are assuming you are still the little girl who is terrified of her father's pain, but you are not." He placed his dry, warm hand on my shoulder. "They fight with fear. We fight with light. The truth is not a weapon. Laura, it is a disinfectant. It is time to open the windows." I looked at the text. I looked at my father's shaky, signed confession on the desk. I looked at the photo of the fake will. I looked at the audit from Texas. I picked them all up. I placed them, one by one, into my briefcase. I clicked the latches shut. "I'm going to court," I said. The storm was over, but the bow in the human heart was just about to break. The final hearing was not held in a small injunction room. It was held in the main courtroom of the Franklin County Courthouse, and it was packed. The reporter from the hallway had done his job. The story of the Schultz family feud, the disgraced socialite, and the mysterious grandfather had been whispered about in the Columbus papers for weeks. Now, they were all here for the conclusion. Lynette entered first, flanked by her lawyer, Vance. She was not in her soft, white cashmere. She was in a severe, dark blue suit. The mask of the victim was gone, replaced by a mask of cold, defiant righteousness. She looked like a CEO prepared for a hostile board meeting. Caroline was not with her. She was in a different room, with a different lawyer, waiting to testify for the state. My father sat in the front row. Behind her, he looked like a hollowed-out gray shell. We entered, me, Rowan, and my grandfather. We sat at the plaintiff's table. I felt the weight of 100 eyes on me. I did not look at them. I looked at the judge. Vance opened, and his strategy was exactly what we expected. It was a performance of breathtaking audacity. "Your Honor," he began, his voice booming with false sincerity. "We are here today because of a tragedy, not a financial one, but a personal one. We are here because this young woman," he pointed at me, "Ms. Laura Schultz, has been manipulated. She has been poisoned by a senile, vengeful old man," he gestured to my grandfather, "who was disowned by this family 30 years ago, an old man who has returned to leverage a minor, emotional family argument, a moment of stress, of fear." He looked at the jury box, though there was no jury, into a full-blown corporate takeover. He painted a picture of me as unstable, vindictive, and greedy. He claimed I had been the one to attack Lynette, that I was prone to hysterical episodes, and that I had fallen and hit my face in my own rage. He claimed the financial records were misunderstandings, that the private investigator was to protect me from myself, and that the forged POA was a clerical error during a stressful time. "This is not a lawsuit, Your Honor," he finished. "This is a fabrication, a desperate, cruel, and frankly pathetic attempt by a troubled young woman to steal the family she was never truly a part of." Lynette dabbed a single, perfect, dry tear from her eye. The room was silent. Judge Diaz looked at Rowan. "Mr. Pierce, your response." Rowan stood. He was quiet. He adjusted his tie. "Your Honor, we will not waste the court's time by responding to Mr. Vance's performance. We will simply present the facts. The defense claims this is a fabrication. We will now present the truth, in order." And he began. It was not a speech. It was a demolition. "First, the defense claims my client is hysterical and violent. We submit Exhibit A." The large monitors in the courtroom lit up, the high-definition video from my hallway. The sound was on. We heard Lynette's voice, clear and sharp. "I will teach you to shut your mouth." We saw the slap. We saw my head crack against the door frame. We saw me collapse, and Lynette stand over me. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. Lynette's face tightened. Second, the defense claims financial misunderstandings. We submit Exhibit B. The screen changed, the forged power of attorney, the hospital medication logs. The records show Mr. Robert Schultz was administered 7 milligrams of lorazepam, a profound sedative dose, 20 minutes before he signed this document, granting his wife full control of his life. We submit this was not a clerical error, it was a criminal act. Third, the defense claims they were protecting my client. We submit Exhibit C. The private investigator's invoices, paid by Caroline, the surveillance photos of me, going to work. And fourth, Rowan's voice dropped, becoming heavy. The defense claims my client is greedy. We will now show what Ms. Schultz was truly trying to hide. He laid out the findings from the depicted raid, the photograph of Lynette and the disbarred lawyer, Dominic Valenti, the drafts of the fraudulent, backdated will, the counterfeit notary seals and forged stamps, seized from Valenti's office. Ms. Schultz was not protecting the family, Your Honor. She was preparing to loot it by fabricating a will to supersede the very trust she knew she was violating. The room was dead silent. Vance was ashen. Lynette's knuckles were white, her nails digging into the table. The mask was cracking. And finally, Rowan said, the defense claims my father is a victim of my manipulation. The truth is, he is a victim of hers, and he has confessed. Rowan held up the 2-page, handwritten statement my father had signed in the attic. We submit the sworn confession of Mr. Robert Schultz, detailing a 20-year history of blackmail and coercion at the hands of Miss Schultz, related to a $200,000 embezzlement he committed in his youth. The signature on the POA was not just coerced by medication, Your Honor, it was coerced by a lifetime of criminal blackmail. The courtroom exploded in murmurs. Lynette let out a small, strangled sound, the last foundation of her defense. My father's loyalty had just been vaporized. Vance was on his feet, sputtering, objecting, calling it hearsay, coercion. Judge Diaz slammed her gavel. Silence. Mr. Vance, your client is being implicated in multiple state and federal felonies. I advise you to let Mr. Pierce finish. Lynette's mask was gone. Her face was a terrifying mottled red. She was staring at me, her eyes burning with a hatred that was so pure it was almost visible. Judge Diaz looked at Rowan. Mr. Pierce, this is the most comprehensive case of systematic fraud I have ever seen. The court is prepared to rule. Your Honor. The voice was not Rowan's. It was my grandfather's. It was quiet, but it cut through the entire silent room. He stood, slowly. He was not a frail old man. He was a pillar. He looked at the judge. Your Honor, we have one final submission. He reached into his heavy dark wool overcoat, the coat he had worn in the hallway. He did not pull out the leather book. He did not pull out the key. He pulled out a large, cream-colored manila envelope. It was sealed not with glue, but with a thick, dark red wax, stamped with the crest I now recognized, the crest of the Orchard Trust. Your Honor, Rowan said, stepping forward, this is the Orchard Addendum. It was held in a separate vault, under separate instructions, to be opened only when all other conditions had been met. We believe they now have been. He handed the envelope to the bailiff, who presented it to the judge. She broke the seal with a small knife, the snap of the wax echoing in the room. What is this? She asked. It is a secret addendum to the Schultz Orchard Trust, Your Honor, Rowan explained, his voice ringing with a new triumphant energy. Executed in 1978 and re-ratified in 2002. We have already established that the Domestic Conduct Clause freezes an abuser's access to the trust, but the founders, it seems, had one final failsafe. He looked at Lynette. This addendum provides for one specific contingency. It states that if the party found guilty of physical battery is also found to have engaged in acts of criminal forgery, specifically, the fabrication of a will or the coercion of a power of attorney. He paused, letting the weight of the moment land. All their rights, Your Honor, are not just suspended, they are permanently and irrevocably terminated. They are barred, in perpetuity, from any and all entities, holdings, partnerships, or assets bearing the Schultz name. All property, all access, all rights are voided. The assets transfer, in their entirety, to the designated preferred heir, Laura Schultz. A sound, a low, terrible, animal sound, ripped from Lynette's throat. She was staring at the envelope. "But how?" the judge whispered, reading the document. "How could they have known this specific combination of crimes?" "That," Rowan said, "is the final twist. If Your Honor will turn to Exhibit C of the addendum." The judge flipped the page. "That," Rowan said, "is a full, independent signature analysis, commissioned by Evelyn Schultz, my client's grandmother. It is dated 1976, 2 years before the trust was even created. It details a pattern of hesitation marks and guided signatures on her son. Robert's documents. My client's grandmother knew, even then, that her son was weak, that he was being coerced. She didn't know by whom, so she built this, a legal landmine, a trap, designed for a specific type of predator. She was protecting her grandchild. She was protecting the future." The room was silent. Lynette's head was bowed. She was shaking. It was over. The verdict was not a verdict. It was an execution. Judge Diaz was swift. 1. The activation of the trust and the addendum was confirmed. 2. Lynette Schultz was permanently and totally barred from all Schultz assets, funds, and properties. 3. Full temporary guardianship and control of the Schultz Orchard Trust was granted to me. 4. All evidence, the forgery, the fake will, the POA, the embezzlement, the blackmail, the assault, was to be immediately transferred to the district attorney's office for criminal prosecution. The DA's representative, who had been sitting in the back, stood up. "Your Honor, in light of this overwhelming evidence and Ms. Schultz's public threat in this building last month, the state will be pressing multiple felony charges. We ask that she be remanded into custody immediately, as she is a clear and present flight risk." "No!" Lynette shrieked, lunging to her feet. "You can't! You bitch! You did this! You think you've won?" 2 bailiffs moved in, grabbing her arms. "I will kill you!" she screamed, her face purple, all trace of the elegant socialite gone. This was the raw, ugly thing from the hallway. "I will—" The sharp, metallic click of the handcuffs cut her off. As they dragged her, screaming and struggling, from the courtroom, her eyes met mine one last time. They were no longer filled with hatred. They were empty. I looked away. I looked at my father. He was sitting alone, his head in his hands, a small, gray, broken man. He looked up at me as I passed. "I'm sorry, Laura," he whispered. I stopped. I looked at him, the man who had sold my childhood to cover his weakness. I did not feel rage. I did not feel pity. I did not feel love. I just felt done. I didn't hug him. I didn't turn my back. I just nodded, once, acknowledging the fact, and I walked away. The sunlight outside the courthouse was so bright it was blinding. The reporters were yelling, cameras flashing, but I didn't hear them. My grandfather stood beside me, his hand on my shoulder. "Winning is not about retrieving the wealth, Laura," he whispered, his voice quiet in the chaos. "It is about retrieving your voice." I felt the heavy, cold iron key in my pocket, the key to the Texas farm. It wasn't just a key to a property. It was the key my grandmother had left for me, a moral inheritance, finally unlocked. I didn't go back to the attic. I went back to my own apartment, and the next day, I went back to Stoneflower Strategies. I sat at my desk, opened my email, and composed a new message. To Laura Schultz, subject, final. I typed one sentence. I am no longer apologizing for existing. I hit send. On the desk in the attic, the small, leather-bound journal, my grandmother's, lay closed. It was not there to be hidden. It was there to be remembered. The true fail-safe, the real moral clause, was never just the ink on the paper, it was the courage to finally activate it. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Let me know where you're listening from in the comments below. I'd love to connect and share our thoughts. Please subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories, like this video, and give it an extra boost by hitting that hype button so more people can hear this story.